Hello and welcome in to the latest episode of the NABC Academy webinar series. I'm Eric Weberg from the NABC office here in Kansas City, and we're really excited to have you joining us today. And before I introduce today's guest, I just want to remind our viewers that you're free to send in, and we welcome questions to be sent in that we can read live here on the webinar. You can tweet any questions you have for our guest today via our Twitter account. You can tweet us at our handle NABC1927. Or by using the hashtag NABC Academy. And today's topic is one that's really grown in prominence over the last decade in the game of basketball. I'm really confident that virtually every coach at every level has spent at least some amount of time considering data and analytics and how they could potentially impact the program. But at the same time, analytics can be, to some of us, difficult to understand. It can even be intimidating for some of us. And others also can feel at times that relying on data and analytics can take away from the instinctual, personal aspects of coaching that coaches love. So that topic, analytics, is what we're going to spend our time discussing here on today's webinar. And with that, I'm honored to introduce today's NABC Academy webinar guest. He's Michigan State Assistant Athletic Director and founder of KPI Sports, Kevin Pauga. Kevin, welcome to today's webinar.
Good to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. Kevin has held a variety of positions in his career that kind of have a unique intersect between coaching and analytics. So Kevin, again, thanks for joining us. And if you could just begin by giving us some of your personal background, what you've done in your career and what you're doing today.
Yeah, I've kind of been accused over the years of being able to speak coach and speak numbers kind of in the same vein, which is kind of a rare combination in a way, but I kind of got my start when I was young. I coached a little league team for a couple of years in suburban Chicago, and did a lot of statistical work at my high school, Hinsdale Central High School, with the different level of basketball teams, and I kind of knew as I moved on to college that I wanted to be involved in sports and be involved on the basketball side, certainly. So I came to Michigan State in the fall of 2000 and spent 4 years working with the basketball program, working with Coach Izzo and his staff as a student basketball manager for those 4 years, and then was fortunate to kind of move into a video coordinator role. Our video coordinator left for the San Antonio Spurs that summer of 2004. A little bit of right place, right time, and I'd been in the video room for a couple of years and was able to kind of move into that role. So moved into video as we were using Exos technologies here at Michigan State, and it was just kind of the advent of the transition from VHS to DVD, and we were certainly digitized in many ways, but the video wasn't quite as portable at that point as it is today. So spent 4 years as the video coordinator. Moved on to the Big Ten Conference as a data analyst for a year, and then had the opportunity to come back to Michigan State, first as the director of basketball operations for Coach Izzo for 6 years, and now I've just kind of finished up my second year in an assistant AD role, and loving every minute of all the opportunity I've gotten here at MSU. So so that's kind of the Michigan State side, but along the way and kind of dating back to my days as a student, I had kind of on a whim written what was kind of the basic principles behind what is now the KPI, and it was originally intended as admittedly my initials being KP and the RPI and kind of a pun, and I'm not sure that I would have necessarily named it KPI if I was naming it today, but the general concepts there is to kind of quantify a team's resume on a game-by-game basis by assigning values based on what the actual value of any given win or loss is, based on where the game's being played, based on the quality of the opponent, and kind of dig into what the meaning of that data is. I kind of compare it to being the third grader that you'd just write down the answer to the math problem, and your teacher would get ticked off that you wouldn't quite have the work to support it and would want to kind of see the process. KPI kind of goes into that process where it can show a team's resume from best win to worst loss, and can kind of give that value to let a coach, let an administrator know, hey, these are the values that you're getting out of these wins and losses in terms of overall resume.
All right. Well, that's great, Kevin. Thanks for sharing your background. I think you're one of the few that can speak with confidence and knowledge in the world of coaching, and also can speak with confidence and knowledge in the area of analytics. So,
Mhm.
so getting right into it, just the word itself, analytics. What exactly, from a coaching perspective and a basketball perspective, do we mean when we say analytics?
With the term analytics, you're really looking to try to find patterns, is what you're trying to do, and then with those patterns, you're trying to interpret what they mean along the way. You're trying to locate them first, and then translate them into a way where you're kind of taking them from numbers into kind of a practical explanation and experience. So you're trying to find those trend lines in the game of basketball. Certainly, I mean, at the end of the day, the team that scores more wins. I mean, it sounds simple, but how do you go about scoring more? Well, you get more shots. How do you get more shots? You're decreasing turnovers. You're increasing field goal attempts. Those type of things along the way. So in terms of analytics, you're trying to locate those patterns not only within the game that you're playing, but also in terms of how your team is performing, kind of along those patterns.
Okay. Who in the coaching world specifically, whether pro, collegiate, internationally, who do you look at as some of the modern pioneers in the analytics world?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways to go in terms of pioneers. I know that Ken Pomeroy's work has certainly become very popular at the Division I men's basketball level. Jeff Sagarin, who I had the chance to meet a year or two ago, is his work dates back 20, 30, 40 years even, in terms of what he's been able to bring to the table. I think that there's a lot of variance from coaches at all sorts of different levels in terms of where they're at in terms of analytics. I know here Coach Izzo still likes to go by feel a lot. Translating over into baseball, the Cubs tend to be more analytics driven. The Houston Rockets tend to be more analytics driven. I'm not sure that there's any one right way per se, and even as an analytics guy per se, I should be sitting here pitching about how analytics are the way to go, but I'm not sure that I necessarily believe that. I think that analytics in general are bits of information to help support your theories and to help make you more informed along the decision-making process. So pioneers is a little bit difficult just because there's so many different roads that people can take along those ways. I think that when Brad Stevens was at Butler, I think he may have hired the first true analytics staff member that then he brought with him to the Celtics, certainly. But everybody's kind of got their own different way to do it, and I'm not sure that we're all that close to an accepted practice per se. But just like a video room 20 years ago maybe had a lot of variance. That's kind of where we're at with analytics now, and I'm sure that we'll kind of trend to more accepted practices here down the road.
Great. And once again, if you're just joining us, welcome into the NABC Academy webinar. Kevin Pauga from Michigan State and KPI Sports is our guest. If you have questions for Kevin at any point on today's webinar, please feel free to tweet at us at NABC1927 or use the hashtag NABC Academy. And now, Kevin, before we get into some of your advice and experience and how you've seen analytics used, what are some of the maybe common misperceptions, some of the maybe myths about analytics that might prevent a coach from using them?
Yeah, I think that in general, coaches need to understand, or just fans, coaches, players, all together kind of need to understand what it is that they're looking at. And in terms of these misperceptions, like let's take rebound margin for instance. There's all sorts of things that go into what type of rebound is possible. So is there a better way than, rather than me just saying that I've out rebounded you by 10 rebounds? Hey, what was my field goal percentage versus your field goal percentage? On average, you tend to rebound about 30%. That's the national average, is about 30% of your missed shots come back as offensive rebounds, and about 70% are defensive rebounds. So if you shoot the ball really well in a given night, that's going to affect your rebound margin. If your defensive field goal percentage is good or bad, it's going to affect it. And kind of taking that one step deeper dive along the lines. Again, there's there's rebound margin, there's these different things that you really need to know where the data is coming from. The second part of that is hey, what is a subjective piece of data versus an objective piece of data? Something as simple as an assist, which is intended to quantify how somebody's creating a shot for their teammates. Well, you may have a little bit more of a liberal score in your building than you do in another building. There's still some subjectivity there. Even here at Michigan State, our coaching staff does a lot relative to hustle stats in terms of tracking offensive rebounding attempts, tracking shot contests, those type of events that happen over the course of a basketball game. And there's subjectivity that happens if you get one coach grading it one game and another coach grading it a second game. And I know that here our staff tries to maintain consistency from game to game. But there's a level of importance in understanding the variables. Where's the data coming from? Who's quantifying that data? And if you're missing those other bits of information, it may skew your perceptions maybe in an incorrect way.
You touched a little bit there on some of the ways at Michigan State that you guys have implemented capturing data. What are some of the other ways that Michigan State has taken advantage of analytics? And if not at Michigan State, what are some other creative ways you've seen other programs making use of data?
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover between analytics work and scouting work, really. As you're trying to not only do an opponent scout but also a self scout, you're trying to find tendencies. And where I think analytics have helped it is as the advent of services like Synergy have come into play, where they're logging every offensive possession of a given team, and they're able to tell you that, hey, this particular player may go left 80% of the time and right 20% of the time. We as video coordinators back in the mid 2000s, we were calculating that data, but that data was difficult to obtain because you had to go through all these games. And if you just went through one game, it wasn't a large enough sample size to really quantify what it was you were trying to say. So as you're building a scouting report and you want to show 5 clips of somebody posting up and you want to accurately emphasize that he goes over his left shoulder 80% of the time, you probably want 4 clips of him going over his left shoulder and 1 clip going over his right shoulder. So there's a lot of crossover on the scouting side. Certainly our staff here at Michigan State deals a lot in the video room, deals a lot with our coaching staff, and we've got a group of student managers that's very well versed to varying degrees in terms of assisting in obtaining that data. So much of it on the analytical side really needs to happen before the game. If you're trying to quantify what those scouting reports are during the game, even risking some recency bias, if somebody beats you over their right shoulder twice in a row and all of a sudden you want to perceive that player to be a right shoulder guy, a lot of that work happens before the game, really.
Great. We've got a couple questions coming in on Twitter. The first is, this is a good question. Are most coaches more unaware of analytics, more unconvinced of analytics, or more intimidated of analytics?
I think that it's all the three, be honest with you, and I think that it really does vary by the coach. I think that for the most part, coaches are growing more aware of the analytical side. There's a few different Division I schools that are starting to dive into that space in a more formal way. But you've already seen many NBA teams employ a full analytics department, whether it comes to scouting for the NBA draft, whether it's doing prep work for an upcoming game. They're already kind of digging into that space in many ways. So I think that part of it certainly matters from an awareness standpoint. In terms of whether or not coaches are convinced of analytics or not, I think that's just going to take time, and some people are going to be more set in their ways. I mean, hey, there's some franchises and some universities and even some high schools that'll swear by it, and their coach will go through and be tracking the high school game when they get home late on a Friday night to kind of go through that. And then there's other folks that want to go by feel. They want to go by the emotion. They want to go, hey, is somebody's head in the game tonight? Is somebody, are there some ancillary things that you can't measure? Hey, is somebody's high school teammate on the other team? Is there something going on in a class? Is there what are these other factors that come into play that can't be measured by analytics? And the coaching staff's going to be more aware of that than any number can even come close to producing. So I would tend to fall somewhere in the middle. I would want to, if I were a coach, which thank goodness for the coaching profession, I'm not. But if I were in that space, I would want to have the information, and I would want to use it in order to make an informed decision, because you're still trying as any analyzer, you're trying to identify the outliers along the way. And you're trying to maximize the outliers that are against you to tilt in your favor. And you're trying to minimize the outliers that are against you and tilt those in your favor as well, and try to find those advantages.
Great. Another question that just came in on Twitter. Again, you can send in your questions at NABC1927 or using the hashtag NABC Academy. Here's another question that you may explain what he's talking about a little bit for us here, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond the 4 factors, what are some of the categories which your staff valued at Michigan State? And maybe start by explaining what the 4 factors are. Yeah,
and our folks here at Michigan State, again, you're dealing with a space that Coach Izzo likes to go by feel, but in terms of what the 4 factors are, those 4 factors are shooting turnovers, rebounding, and then the 4th one is free throws. And what you're trying to quantify is how successful you are in each of those spaces. And kind of be tracking that information as you're going. Again, with Coach Izzo being more of a feel guy, we're not dealing in that space at MSU as much. But the 4 factors are something that Dean Oliver kind of pioneered several years ago, and it's something that's been widely accepted around the basketball world. So in terms of Michigan State, I'm not sure that we've dealt with the 4 factors as much. We're more about back, at least in my time dealing more with the basketball program on a day-to-day basis. We're more about trying to find trend lines, more trying to whether it's cheating plays, whether it's cheating which direction somebody's going to go, trying to find those trends rather than an overall stat sheet per se. Because for Coach Izzo, he'd rather be handed a box score after a game, and you might get time to throw 1 or 2 data points into the conversation. But he's one, even as you're preparing to play a Big Ten team on Saturday, on Wednesday night after the previous game, he's getting a printed out packet of the 25 box scores that the team has played to date. So that's kind of his thing, and I'm sure that many coaches have different ways that they go about kind of getting their data. Coaches would rather have raw data that he can kind of sift through, rather than have somebody tell him what they think the data says.
We've talked a lot so far about using analytics from a team stats and performance, and then a uniquely individual performance. One of the questions that we just got on Twitter brings us to the topic of roster management and of lineups. And the question that we get from Jack here is, have you found lineup efficiencies to be one of the most proper uses of analytics? So yeah, if you could just share a little bit on how roster management and creating lineups and different mix of players can be informed by analytics.
I'll be honest with you. I think that lineup analytics, if not used properly, can be really misleading. Rather than looking at combinations of 5 where frankly somebody could just kind of sneak into the right or wrong combination, I'd rather take a deeper dive into, hey, if we've got If we've got a bigger lineup that we play part of the game, or a smaller lineup that we play part of the game, I want to look at how those two lineups compare. Or when we take our 2 point guards and we play them together and we move somebody off the ball, or as that 3.5 position kind of comes into play. Are you playing 4 guards? You playing 2 bigs, and kind of where that we kind of call it the 3.5, where somebody playing the 3 or playing the 4 per se. Where does that kind of fall? So I'd rather look at two person lineup combinations, 3-person lineup combinations, than 5-person lineup combinations per se. I think that you're gonna find better information there as to what those trends are. But the other part of this is not only looking at the sample size of that combination, but who is that combination going up against? If that combination's going up against your opponent's first group or your opponent's second group, those can be two different bits of data interpretation. So you can really end up taking a deep dive that could start going so deep you're not quite sure what you're looking at. But again, that kind of leads to that perspective of just looking simply at a box score and interpreting that somebody's plus 17. I think that there's a deeper dive to have than just digging in on that part of the story.
We've talked a lot about mining data from mining in-game data. How about practice? How at Michigan State or at other programs can you capture data from what your players are doing in practice and then utilize that for game planning?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. Some of it is as simple if you've got the staffing capabilities, if you've got enough student managers, where you're simply tracking. Hey, this is how many free throws each player made during today's practice. We shot 50 free throws at 3 different times. You got 150 reps, and here's the percentage that somebody shot. I mean, it can be as simple as that. You can also track field goals. Really, anything that you would track in a game, you can track in a practice. And it's funny. One of the first things that I did at Michigan State was I was in charge of compiling practice stats as a freshman manager way back several years ago, and kind of built something in Excel where we would total up each days, and then we would disseminate the information on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and a full season basis, just to kind of show those trend lines. So if you've got enough staffing, there's mechanisms to do that. There's also some ways to do it off of practice film. If you're talking about maybe just live action, there's some technology for those that have some money to be able to instill some video cameras mounted in your practice gym or in your arena, and some folks have kind of gone down that road. But again, there's all sorts of data that you can grab from practice data to game data. You still have to be able to have time to total it up and still time to sift through it. It's great to have all this data, but at some point you lose its effectiveness just by a lack of efficiency.
Once again, for those just tuning in, welcome to the NABC Academy webinar. We're glad to be joined today by Michigan State Assistant Athletic Director and the founder of KPI Sports, Kevin Pauga. A reminder, you can send in your questions to us anytime on Twitter using the hashtag NABC Academy or tweeting at us directly at NABC1927. Kevin, you made reference there to gets right to my next question. You used the term for those that have some money. Well, if I'm a program that doesn't have a Big Ten national champion budget that Michigan State has, if I'm a D2 coach, a D3 coach, a high school coach, how can I use analytics the way that a big school like Michigan State does?
You can, and I don't mean to be simple about it, but what I've found is that regardless the level, there is a large level of interest in terms of people wanting to get involved in your program. And I know that we have a lot of benefits here at Michigan State, but really analytics comes down to manpower. How much manpower can you get? Can I add an extra student manager? Can I talk about can I talk to my mathematics department on a given campus. I mean, we've done a little bit of work here with our computer science department, kind of going down that road a little bit and finding in that space as to, hey, there's this student that's really into basketball, that's a math major, or whether it's a senior capstone project or an internship or things along those lines. Because we have the benefit of being involved in an academic institution. We talk about the mix of academics and athletics all the time. This is a perfect opportunity to marry the two. You may find that one of the student athletes on your team has an interest in the analytical side. So there's plenty of interest. Just judging by my inbox on a given day or week, I've consistently got a few people that are reaching out. Hey, would love to kind of talk analytics. Would love to talk sports math. Would love to kind of talk along these lines. So I think that it's incumbent upon coaches and staffs to be proactive. Find the resources on your campus, and you may be able to help that person as much as that person's able to help you.
So if you're a coach who is seeking out some managers or student interns or people from even a math department on campus, what are some of the skill sets that you look for specifically in them? What does somebody in that position need to have to help out your basketball program?
Microsoft Excel. The idea of understanding basics of the game is obviously important, but then also the idea of being able to take that information and in a very efficient manner translate that data, whether it's tallies on a sheet of paper or a box score that you're pulling off of an opponent's website. Being able to take that data and put it into a manageable form is important. It doesn't have to be terribly involved on the Excel side. You don't need to get into writing programs within the software or anything along those lines. But I think that you can find that there's some pretty basic skill sets that for the most part is pretty fundamental on a university campus. As computer science requirements kind of move to the forefront, and basic Microsoft Excel even at the high school level becomes important. So it's a little bit more complicated than grabbing a calculator and dividing out field goal percentage per se. But some of it's going to depend on what it is that you want out of the data too. How in depth do you want to get? But you got to start somewhere. Get somebody on your campus to jump in, and I think that you could be surprised as to not only how much you can help each other, but where an analytics side of things could go.
That's great. The questions keep coming in on Twitter. Once again, if you have them, please send them to us at NABC1927 or use the hashtag NABC Academy. A really good question from a coach that just came in here. He says, have we reached the point of peak analytics? He says, Synergy gives us so much information. When does it plateau?
I think that I can make an argument that it already has. And there is such a thing as information overload. I mean, again, there's only so much that can happen if you've got 2, 3, 4 days to prepare for a game, and you're preparing yourself, you're preparing your team. There's really only so much time that's going into this, and remember this too, that over the course of a basketball game, basketball is fast. The average shot in Division I men's basketball takes place every 17 seconds. The average length of a possession is about 17 seconds. So you don't have time in that 17-second span to really dig in on the analytical side of, gosh, I think that I should do this for this different look for this, because this 3-man lineup is the most optimized against this combination that this opponent has just put in. Like you don't have that time. So you're digging in, and I don't want to say that you're trying to take executive level information and utilizing it in that way. But at some point we've got to keep this simplified, that the team that scores more wins, the team that puts the ball in the basket more wins, and the players are playing the game. If the player doesn't understand that post player I mentioned earlier is going left shoulder 80% of the time, right shoulder 20% of the time, it doesn't matter. If he's guarding the wrong shoulder and a guy scores 6-8 consecutive points because the guy isn't following the scouting report, then great, you have analytics, but it didn't help you. So it's more about taking the information that you have, translating it into a couple bullet points for your players to be able to interpret, and then letting your players play the game. So you're getting that information, and really why you're trying to get that information in this setting is, I bring up the example of recency bias, where if somebody gives up an offensive rebound on 2 consecutive possessions, all of a sudden you'll in your mind start to think that player is playing bad. Or if that player misses 3 consecutive shots, even though they might have been 5 for their first 8, if they miss 3 consecutive shots, all of a sudden your mind, because our recency bias and kind of how our brains are all programmed, you remember it's kind of a what have you done for me lately. Analytics kind of helps you see a bigger picture and helps you kind of see what's happening beyond just a single possession or even a single game.
So looking ahead to the future, in terms of how coaches use analytics in their programs, what are some of the trends and the uses of data and analytics that you expect to see growing and maybe appear for the first time here in the coming years?
Yeah, I'm interested to see if down the road we may see a little bit more technology on a given bench. And I know that there's some rules that are preventing some of that now, but there may be some better ways to kind of obtain the information and pass the information along, where rather than some pen and paper models or printing out a box score, you may have a little bit more information. And there's a little bit of that going on within the framework or the rules now. But that's certainly one way. Could we be sitting in a world where you've got a screen on your bench that's giving you real-time points per possession data and offensive rebounding percentages and turnover rates that you're looking at in game as a coach? And let's not kid ourselves, some of that the coaches are getting that information. They're just getting it to whether somebody's dividing it out or whether they're just kind of taking a quick look. Oh, we have 8 turnovers, they have 5 turnovers, we're turning over the ball over more. There's some of that. So I think that it's more about how we're obtaining the data than anything else. I think that we're interpreting the data that we have at a relatively high level, but that data acquisition will likely improve. The other part of it, and there's the NBA has kind of gone down this road relative to player tracking, relative to tracking, hey, this is how many dribbles so-and-so has taken in a given possession, or this is how many passes lead to a given shot, or some of that player tracking. I'm not sure that we fully know what that means at this point. Hey, if you take 2.7 dribbles versus 1.7 dribble, your field goal percentage increases. And I don't even know whether that's the case or not. But I think that we're going to see the science behind the game become a little bit more advanced. But let's not kid ourselves. Again, I want to emphasize, if your player can't shoot, you don't need analytics to tell you that. And if your 6'2" guy is caught on the block against a 6'10" post guy, the 6'10" post guy has the advantage. You don't need analytics to tell you that. And that's kind of where I think that it's important that we caution that hey, it's not a numbers game. It's not a game where every decision that you make is strictly, hey, this is what the numbers tell me. In baseball, you bring a left-handed pitcher in more often than not out of your bullpen when 2 straight left-handed hitters are coming up. But that's not an absolute. You're trying to find those nuances kind of along the way. From a data standpoint, the team that's expected to win a game wins about 78% of the time over the course of the year. So you're trying to find that those 1 in 5 outliers and make sure that you're turning more losses into wins than wins into losses, really.
All right, great, Kevin. I think that's a good place for us to end. Thank you so much for joining us on today's NABC Academy webinar. We really learned a lot, Kevin, from your background in the coaching space, in the operations space, and now what you do with analytics as well. And really look forward to following your continued work there at Michigan State and with the KPI.
Great. Thanks so much for the time.
All right. Kevin, thanks again. And if you joined us in progress on today's webinar, don't worry, we will have this archived immediately at nabc.com and on the NABC's YouTube page. And again, thanks to Kevin and thanks to all of our viewers who tuned in today. We'll see you next time on the NABC Academy webinar.